All right, and we're live, and we are the ICF Saudi chapter, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming Carol Keith. Carol is an industry name. Anybody who has been if you've been looking for training programs, if you're looking for a great mentor, Carol's been has been coaching for over 20 years. Her niches have been in executive coaching, marriage and relationships. I guess that would sort of lead into our conversation today. She's just super amazing coach. I've had the privilege of being both coached and trained by Carol. So having her here today, I'm just a little bit starstruck and I'm just so happy she's with us. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Islam. I'm delighted to be here and thoroughly delighted to be partnering with you all tonight. That's great.
Yeah. So Carol, can you talk a little bit about the title of today's webinar?
I sure can. I chose that title partially from different work that I've done over the years. And I kind of wanted to separate what we're doing tonight into two parts. The heart, who we show up as coaches in relationship coaching, and the art, which is going to be more of some of the tools that we might use and some of the tricky spots that come along with coaching relationships. But what's kind of fascinating is that relationships exist in all sorts of ways. So marriage coaching seems to be what comes to mind sometimes, but I think one of the questions that we're going to ask as we get started is, what does come to mind when you think of relationship coaching? So I'm kind of curious what you think.
Right, so please, whenever you'd like to chime in, just go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll be doing that a lot today. Today's going to be very interactive, so please do not be shy. Today's not a day to be shy.
That's right. Very interactive. We love to have a conversation because it's not all set in stone. So Alan, you look like you're ready to chime in.
With my clients, we have a lot of conversations around team dynamics in the workplace, motivation, performance, just pure relationship balancing.
Okay. True. How about anybody else?
I really enjoyed the way you wrote the title, like with the heart and the art in there. I thought it was very creative, but also it made me think that with conflicts and peace, there is like something little deeper, something behind, what we see in our regular relationships. And we need to look, for the heart in what we say, in what we do. So it felt like there is kind of a deeper meaning behind. You need to look a little deeper.
Yeah, we do. And all change starts with ourselves. So I'm hoping that's going to be part of what we do today is a little bit of work on ourselves in the process. So that's one of the reasons that I'd really like it to be interactive and get started that way.
So we have a comment from Maha in the chat, and she's saying, for me, it's about all types of relationships, family, friends, and spouse.
Yeah. It is indeed. And relationship in a mean where there are relations connecting, even relations with oneself. Yes.
That's a big one. That is huge.
Yeah, it's huge. All right, well, let me share my screen just so that we can get started with some thought provoking. So I'm going to ask you to please go ahead and either jump into the chat that Islam or Farah can monitor for us. And please also don't hesitate to jump in with questions and thoughts. I really would like to, this is going to be very interactive. I'd like to have your input on this as well. So I'll begin the share. And I just want us to give you this thought. Here's our beginning conversation. Human beings are messy, full of contradictions and powerfully ugly emotions like greed and envy, guilt, rage, and shame, which sit uncomfortably alongside of our compassion, love, and natural ability to collaborate. So consequently, coaches must be much more willing to roll up your sleeves and work with this wonderful messiness. What comes to mind when you hear something like that?
I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but somebody wrote acknowledging feelings and somebody else wrote too much. So,
Too much. Yeah. Well, that's almost the topic of today's conversation that we're going to have with each other. It's messy. We are just messy, and relationship coaching is messy. So let's talk a little bit about the heart of relationship coaching. Oftentimes, coaches are trained to listen with our heart and our head and remain neutral. And one of the things that I would like to pose to you today to think about is what would happen if we adopted a more courageous stance or posture of partnering with our clients to discover new possibilities and facilitate positive change. Our ICF competencies now are doing a great deal of focusing on partnering. How would you shift from being neutral to being courageous in your conversations?
taking risks.
Taking risks in what way?
The client already knows about themselves and maybe moving towards what they don't know about themselves, like asking provoking questions,
Okay.
trusting intuition, that sort of thing.
What other ideas do people have?
Let's read our chat box.
Okay, great.
Of course, coaching is partnering with clients. We have follow instincts. We have digging deep. Be clear on facts. Courageous could mean different things. And facing with courage. Oh, one more. Follow intuition and go along with the coaching. So following your client.
Okay. What about also the idea of reflective inquiry? If we were to reflect back how we received what a client is giving to us and asking a question around that, the idea of what story our client is telling themselves, have they actually seen what that story really is? One of the images, the mental images that come to me when I think of this is the idea of almost a conveyor belt that's going on inside of us. And we have this conveyor belt between our minds and our hearts or our emotions. It's not separate. We're not able to separate that fully in ourselves. But the interesting thing to note about that is that movement back and forth between head and heart oftentimes is in the dark. And by the dark, I don't mean something particularly evil, but what I mean is that the only light that is there is the light of ourselves. There is no other light shining on that. And so the idea of bringing those words out into the open for your client, and you being the light shining on to your client is bringing a different awareness to your client, evoking awareness, one of the competencies, evoking awareness. How is that landing with people in terms of being courageous?
I think it's hard for a lot of people to actually face the truth of what the story really is. And I think it's a lot of challenge for the coach to know, you know, what is that thin line that he or she they're walking on? When can they push further? You don't want to kind of take risk in the wrong time, so you're not kind of resulting in the client shutting off. So I feel it's a lot of timing, readiness of the client, and you know, I don't believe it's an easy thing to do, especially when the client is believing a certain story and it's hard for them to face the truth of what's really happening.
I think that's true for all. And yet, what happens if we are, as coaches, are not attached to the outcome of our question? I wonder.
We have a question from Peter.
Okay, Peter?
Saying nice, but doesn't it borderline to consulting or advising?
To be courageous in our questions?
I'm not sure. I think he might be referring to reflective inquiry, but we can ask Peter to clarify that.
We can ask Peter to clarify that, yeah. So in the meantime, let's think a little bit about how can we expand our mindsets to better coach and influence change. How can we encourage some of those conversations with our clients? How do we expand our mindsets?
So Maha's saying self-manage. You know, I would like if it, Carol, I'm not sure how this fits into your plan, but would it be helpful if people just unmute themselves and
It would be. Yes, it would be.
Yeah. So can we invite you to do that, please? If you'd like to participate, just go ahead. And it's an informal chat between us. We'd like to have this meeting of the minds today to dig deep into this topic. So it'd be nice to be able to have that conversation. So please jump in anytime.
One of the things that comes to my mind in terms of our mindset, to expand the mindset, is the idea that the client is coming to you in a specific moment in time in their relationships, in themselves. And if you have the opportunity, which you do right now, to look at your Zoom screen and see that, for example, all I can see of Islam today is a rectangle. And that's the snapshot of what I'm getting in this moment. I don't know what's going on the other side of the screen or this part of the screen or that part of the screen. I only know what's going on with Islam in the moment and her cup of coffee. And so when you think about that with your clients, each and every opportunity that you get with your client is a unique opportunity in that given moment. What is that doing for expanding your mindset as to how you're coming to a coaching conversation?
I'm sorry, could you reframe the question a little?
If you think of each and every opportunity that you have with your client as being unique, every time you're with them is unique. Even though you see that client maybe for months at a time, how are you coming in your mindset each time to make that a fresh experience?
I guess try to see new things every single time that you talk with that client. Try to see them as a new person in every single session.
Okay. Thank you for that. Maybe even coming with an emptying of ourselves, preconceived notions, the conversations that have taken place in the past, not forgetting them entirely, but coming with this as a fresh experience. Let's talk for a minute then about the art of relationship coaching. What skills and tools can you add to your toolbox to better coach some of these complexities? One that I mentioned a minute ago was reflective inquiry. Another possibility is to listen deeply. And another possibility is to share your perspective. Possibility. How do those sit and land with a group?
I think that when people come into a session, what they truly do want is to be seen and heard. So when we do listen very deeply, sometimes just that is enough for them to
Yes,
feel
indeed.
everything that they do need to feel in that time.
Thank you for that.
Carol, could you clarify what you mean by
Maybe
sharing your perspective as
that we
opposed
have heard.
Okay, I got a little feedback on that one.
I asked if you could clarify what you mean by sharing your perspective versus reflecting back.
Okay. Reflecting back in my mind, Alan, is coming as a reflection of what the client just said to me and following it with a question. So, for example, this sounds as though the story that you have going on in your head has affected you deeply. What do you see about that at this point? Sharing perspective would have a little bit more to do with what I've experienced in light of what the client has experienced. So, for example, in my life, thus and such might have happened. If it's evoking awareness for your client, that's the key in the ICF competencies would be, are you actually using that moment to evoke new awareness? Does that shed some light on it, Alan, from your perspective, or do you have a different perspective?
Yes, I appreciate, I think I appreciate where you're going with that. I'm often very careful to ask, may I share, for example, an observation, for example, or may I share an experience? So as to kind of signal that it's coming from me as opposed to from the client themselves.
Indeed. And following it up with an inquiry. How does that land? Where are you with this? What insights have you gotten from what I just shared?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. How are we measuring or what are we doing to measure our own level of agility or emotional IQ? What sorts of things are we using for that?
Like empathy, maybe?
Mhm.
Mona's suggesting emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, exactly. Yeah. And lots of other tools. Some of the tools could be personality assessments. There could be personality assessments, and there are personality assessments of the coach, of the couples together or two people together. Oftentimes, personality assessments can be run in tandem with one another in order to gain more insight. And they also are a snapshot in time. So it's the snapshot of the moment that you're working with those clients. So one of the things we want to think of is that we must come into this coaching space carrying a deep compassion for the traumas that our clients have been in or may be experiencing. And I imagine that you all are experiencing something very similar to what I'm experiencing as well in this day. The traumas that we are experiencing have increased. There's much more volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity than existed before. And so we really do, there are lots of states of overwhelm that are really part of the art of coaching at this point. So let's move on to something that I would like for you all to think about: different kinds of relationship coaching. My relationship coaching started out and continues at this point to the largest extent, either with marriages or relationships between spouses. There's also a lot of parent coaching. I've done a fair amount of that, parent-child. Certainly neighbors, as Ellen brought up before, in colleagues, employer, employee. Any others that one can think of that we may have missed in this frame? In today's ever-changing world, there are lots. Relationships exist everywhere. So what applies in terms of our ethics? So if you look at the ICF competencies, you'll see that we have a number of these competencies that apply, but some of the largest of them are the ethics. Our responsibility to our clients, one at a time. How do you imagine that might work if you are coaching couples? What questions come to your mind with that?
I guess like how much you can talk about if one person is, I mean, it depends, because if they're coming in like a group session, both couple, like in, I mean, one couple coming in, but then they also come in separately at times. Like, what are you supposed to disclose, and what are you supposed to talk about? So kind of the ethics around that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that comes up most of the time. In my experience, the most successful has been couples individually. And then when you have the opportunity to pose them together, you have to remember in your ICF ethical obligation that you are not allowed to disclose anything that the other person said. And so one of the difficulties or one of the humps to get over when you're doing that kind of coaching is what I call questions, which are suggestions that are carefully masquerading as questions. So we need to be careful in that arena, that we are asking very, very open-ended questions and not leading one partner over another. We also have to watch ourselves and the context of who we come as. What about what person A said about person B is triggering something in ourselves? What about that is something we're familiar with? What about that is something that happened in our family of origin that brings up all kinds of questions, triggers, difficulties? What thoughts come to your mind when we talk about that?
Sometimes maybe you are going through the same experience as the couple you're coaching, and maybe this it will be a bit of a problem.
Yes, indeed. Interestingly, one of the things I discovered early on in coaching was that I wanted to, I thought, provide value to clients. And I thought the way to do that was in area of expertise. And so I had some expertise in mediation, particularly for men and women who were getting divorced. And so I thought, oh, what a great niche to have in coaching. And I soon discovered that I was triggered left and right by all sorts of stories that clients would come with, because I'd either heard it before or I had experienced it itself. So one of the things that we want to be careful of when we are in coaching in general, but particularly in relationship coaching, are the triggers that come to us as a result of an area that we have a great deal of experience with. And that is extremely difficult in coaching relationships. So the competencies talk about the idea that we have to be sensitive to a client's identity, their environment, their experiences, their values and beliefs, which are all forming part of the story. We also have to remember that the competencies are asking us to maintain our own emotional content. And we have an obligation to maintain the ethics from one partner to another. Is very clear with the sponsor-client relationship, where you might be working with a client who it's being paid by someone else. In executive coaching, that seems a little more obvious. With spouses, it's a little more difficult. And with parent-child, it is also more difficult because oftentimes the parents want to have value for what they have just spent their money on. What is it that you're going to do? So I'm highly recommending that when you get involved in situations like this, that you have those very difficult conversations with parent-child or sponsor-client or even spouses, that your role is not to be providing information to the other person. Your role is to be facilitating conversation among those people. I've found in particular with the parent-child coaching setting that it is dicey at times. So be sure to ask the question in advance, what is it that you would like as the return on your investment? What would you like to see happen? So if little Johnny is supposed to suddenly be the model child and have perfect grades, is that really something that you as the coach can deliver? What is really more realistic? Let me find out where that lands. What do you think?
I think if we could reflect that back to the parent in that case, as a coach, I can work to facilitate the child reaching their fullest potential, as opposed to a set definition of what that potential is. Maybe that might be successful.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alan. What do you think about with regard to spouses? How do you think you'd have that conversation?
So we have a couple of comments in the chat box. One is, if they want a specific outcome, they should hire a trainer, not a coach, to unleash the hidden gifts of the client. And then one, I think, is just a response to what you just mentioned. As you said, I can work to let them hear each other and have a fruitful conversation. So I guess to facilitate the conversation between the two.
Indeed, indeed. So as coaches, I want you to be careful of promising outcomes. It is, as we said at the very, very beginning, this is a messy business. And so we want to be careful that we don't promise outcomes. And we also want to be careful, particularly if we are doing spouse coaching, that they're aware that it's coaching and it's not counseling. And that sometimes becomes a borderline issue. So you want to be careful with that. Anybody have any questions about that aspect, that statement that I just made?
Can you clarify that, please? Can you clarify the difference between spouse coaching and therapy?
Yeah, therapy is really going to be delving into where this came from and what needs to be done more for a diagnostic purpose. Where do we need to go from here? Where do we need more help? And I have many times sent clients to counseling as well, as sort of a joint project going on. Coaching is going to be noticing the patterns that have come from things of the past, and what do we want that noticing to inform where we're going from here. Yeah, they often work in tandem. But what I've found the most with particularly spousal coaching is the idea that here's what we're learning about each other. How can we move forward in a deeper way with what we're learning about each other in the process? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to add a point about the parent-child coaching. And I found out that when some parents come to me and they tell me, I want you to coach my child, most often it's them who needs to be coached, not the child. And they have really a problem. It's what they want out of their child. It's not what the child wants for themselves. And that's where the conflict comes. And then I try to move them into, let's work with you. And, I ask some questions, and sometimes they don't like it because I tell them maybe it's you. We should work together, not the child, and how to reach out and talk to your child. And this is a big problem, I think.
Yes.
Sometimes.
And kudos to you. And I think one of the things that you're indicating that you do in advance is have that conversation as you start the relationship, that every relationship has at least two parties associated with it. And you need to be as open to being coached in this setting as you are asking your child to be open and coached in this setting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you for that. Yeah.
We have another question in the chat box. Can I coach someone who is following up with a spouse consultant? Sometimes the client is going to the consultant just to satisfy her husband, for example. So do you mean counselor or therapist when you say consultant?
Sorry, counselor.
Counselor. Okay.
Well, certainly. I think one of the things that I would approach again at the beginning is and I would very much recommend that you, if you have a contract of some kind, that you think that language through very carefully. But I would very definitely have a conversation with this person in advance to see what the openness, how willing they are to be open to maybe even you having a conversation with the therapist. So that's part of the ethics aspect of it. You want to make sure that that's an open arena. If you don't have the opportunity to do anything other than coach the one person, then that's what you do. You coach that one person in this rectangle, so to speak, that is of the moment that they have come to you. But you're only getting obviously one side. Yeah. All right, so I'd like you to do a little bit of work yourselves. So I would ask you to write down the names of 2 or 3 people in your life whom you wish would change in some way. So make sure you read that very, very carefully. Write down the names of 2 or 3 people, doesn't need to be many, 2 is plenty, of in your life whom you wish would change in some way. All right, now I'm going to ask you to do just a little bit of math associated with that. I'd like you to, with each person, so let's use John for example, what is the percentage of time that you spend helping things in this relationship go right? And how much time, percentage-wise, do you spend dealing with things that are going wrong? So let me say that one more time. Use this person's name. What is the percentage of time that you spend helping things go right? And what is the percentage of time that you spend dealing with things that are going wrong? All right, so save that. We're going to use that in a little bit. I want you to think about some ways of feeling. Our society often tells us that we see things as either good or bad. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us that we can choose to adopt feelings or adopt a mindset that is more calm about a situation. Notice that I didn't use the word neutral, but calm. And for the process of coaching, keep in mind that the opposite of sad, for example, is not happy. The opposite of sad is not feeling sad. And also keep in mind that being calm, let's say right here in the middle of our screen, is not the same as being neutral or not caring about a situation. We often feel closer to calm when we're in a better position to handle most situations. So for example, if we were here, we might be irritated, as opposed to depressed, angry, or anxious, and we're not quite at calm. And if we were here, we might be comfortable with where we are at this moment. So let's break down a reaction a little bit. We are aware of something. We have a belief about something. And we have a behavior about something. But oftentimes what happens is we truncate our beliefs about something. We often react. We go to from awareness. We eliminate our beliefs and thoughts and intentions about it and move to feelings and behavior. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to be coaches for me. That's what I'd like you to be coaches for in our listening. So if you would take maybe the piece of paper that you're writing on and have your 3 columns, what I was aware of, what I thought about A, and how I felt, or what I did, because what I did and how I felt might be. And I'm going to tell the story. So I'll just get off my screen for a minute. Everybody okay with that? I will get off my screen for a minute and I will give you the story. And what I'd like you to do is literally to write down the observations as you as coaches are making in each of these columns. Just want to make sure, touch base with everybody that the idea of that you have all 3 columns. Anybody need that again? Perfect. Thanks, Islam. What I was aware of, what I thought about, and what I felt or did. Perfect. All right. So I'm your client, and then I'd like to get some reactions. 2018 came along, and I have 3 children, the oldest of which I've been very, very close to for most of my life. Son, daughter, and son. My oldest son came and introduced us to a young lady that he really enjoyed. And we got to know her just a very little bit. We only saw her a couple of times. And in February of 2019, 18, have to get my years straight. He came to me and said, "Mom, I would like for you to go with me to pick out an engagement ring." And so we did so. And then we had a moment when he asked her to marry him. And we all sat together as a new family, her parents and us, at over a dinner. From that moment on, my son stopped speaking to me. My reaction was one of deep pain and surprise. I thought, wait a minute, we had this marvelous relationship. How could this possibly have happened? And I wanted desperately to not go down the road of the mother-in-law who rides her wicked broom around the room, and blaming the new girl in his life for ruining our relationship. And so I withdrew because I didn't want to be offensive. So that's all the information I'm going to give you to start with. I'd like to see what kinds of questions in these columns come to your mind, or what did you put down in the columns that you might want to sort of double check with me. They don't have to be perfectly formed coaching questions. What comes to mind?
So I put down for what I was aware of, that you were aware that you were very close to your kids. That was about the awareness. What you thought of was that I don't want to be this mother-in-law type of stereotype. And what you felt was pain, surprise, and what you did is withdrew. So that's just what I have.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mom.
So I'd ask you, what's the benefit of withdrawing?
What's the benefit of withdrawing? Ooh, that's a great question. Keeping myself from responding with the pain and anger that I felt. That was the benefit in my mind. What do you think the result of that was? Yes, lots of distance. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you mean by stop talking? Is it that he stopped talking, like you're not close like before? What is it exactly you mean by that?
Very good question. That's a very good question. So it was, as we have discovered, an assumption on my part. And remember that assumptions are beliefs that we have that have never been tried, that we don't have data to prove these assumptions. And the assumption that I made was that my relationship with my son would continue because it was very solid. So one of the things that I discovered about myself in that process was, first of all, a great deal of pride that I had raising my children. But the second thing was that this was a new venture for him and for me.
Mhm.
And so my actions were based, you'll see that I did, the whole belief piece sort of came out of it, were strictly based on that assumption. So it was not that I needed to be intimately involved with my son at all, but it was so drastic. He literally stopped talking, not even in a little bit, that it was just jarring in terms of behavior.
What triggered him to do so?
That's a question I don't have an answer to. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a question I don't have an answer to. So I was processing that on my own. But now you see, again, that's a perfect example and marvelous questions about how complicated relationship coaching can be. Yeah. Messy, as they say.
Extremely.
Yes. And one of the things that I'm starting to discover now is that part of that was a feeling that he was having that it was now his responsibility, and he made this line in his mind in the sand, so to speak, that at that moment of engagement was the time in which he was supposed to take over being head of his household, and it was supposed to start at that place. In my mind, it was not supposed to start until they were actually married.
Okay.
Good question, Zagner. Thank you. What other questions come to mind, coaches?
I don't exactly know how to word this question, but something about the stereotype of the mother-in-law. Like, I'd like to challenge that perspective that you went to right away. Like, what's the worst that could happen if that was the perspective you're seen in? Or like I said, I don't know how to word it, just something about that.
Monster-in-law. Yes, I love that. That's a great question. And that stereotype, I believe, came from, as I have learned to process through this, came from my upbringing. That you wanted to, there was an expectation for my own mother to be part of my grandmother's life on a regular basis, which is something that evidently from her upbringing, she railed against just a bit. So it was that upbringing of not wanting to be a front and center, knowing that my son's life needed to change, but it was also area that we had not navigated before, which is almost always true in relationships. We find ourselves in places that we have not navigated before, and it gets messy, and that's exactly what happened. And the other thing, Maha, that I wanted to be careful of, particularly as a coach, is I wanted to make sure that I was not jumping to the conclusion that seemed very obvious to me, that this young lady marched into my son's life and changed him. I did not want to jump to that conclusion. And yet I believe some of the conclusions that I did jump to were just as painful and just as debilitating.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please do.
So you've been processing through all this, and you have a lot of, thoughts, maybe this and maybe that. So as a coach, for me, I would probably say, what do you want out of this relationship? Where do you want to take that relationship? And maybe start from there, instead of going, what has happened and everything, has happened, it's a fact, and then just, set the real, a relationship that you'd love to have with your son and work on it, and, coach you through this process. I don't know, that's what I would do.
And I think that, I think that's an excellent an excellent process to go through. One of the things I would want to encourage you to do is to at least explore how we got here a little bit, so
Yeah.
that process is not something that's repeated. So again, not in the counseling sense, but as I had noted before, in the pattern sense. So when I took it down to the beliefs aspect, I noticed a pattern for myself. This was not the first time, and this is true for all of us as humans. It's not the first time, nor will it necessarily be the last time. I certainly hope there are fewer times of that realization in myself. Which we're going to get into just a little bit more when we explore our own.
Okay.
But that's a very good question. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that question. What part of the relationship with your son can shed light on your son's reaction? That's a good question, and one I want to think about. Yeah. What made me choose withdrawal? I withdrew because I wanted to make sure that my heightened emotions were not going to be detrimental to the relationship further. Was that the right thing to do? Probably not, Alan. It was probably the better thing to do to process it maybe a little more fully. However, it moved so rapidly that there was little time to process that. So the processing is still going on to some degree, but it's good. Islam. Yeah, those are good, great questions.
What's the relationship between withdrawal and giving up?
Well, you know, that to me, it bespeaks that comment earlier that we were talking about, that slide of being neutral. Neutral isn't possible in that setting. And neutral often is not possible. There's still some emotion. So I got to the place of calm with it, where it was, okay, this is, as Agnar had said, this is what it is. And we need to move a little bit further from there. But I also wanted to make sure that I went back and looked at, what did I do to contribute to this? What can I learn from myself? And this is a process that I want to encourage you with your clients to look through. And you're only dipping your toe into the past. You're not sitting in it like you would in counseling. You're dipping your toe into the pattern so that you can see how that happened and why it did. So let me go ahead, Islam. I'm going to share the screen. Go right ahead.
So because dealing with relationships can be so messy, do you first need to assess with your client whether or not this is a relationship that they want to save? I mean, obviously in your example, it's a relationship with your son. There's no question around that. But we would leave that up to the client to decide if this is a relationship they'd like to work on, because obviously it's a lot of work, right?
Yes, it is.
And we expect that they might not want to work on a certain relationship, right? And just continue following their lead, correct?
That is very possible. I found it very, very rare when clients actually come to you for help. Because when they're coming to you for help, there is a supposition that they're there to do something with this, some sort of forward progress. In some cases, it means forward progress where they have progressed to a place. They may need to wait on the other person to progress, and they then have to choose the stance that they're going to take in that waiting process. I have yet to find a client that is actually cutting it off entirely, but that certainly does exist. Yeah. So let's dig just a little bit deeper, coaches, into our characteristic styles of self-justification. And for those of you who are familiar with the Arbinger Institute, Arbinger's thesis is that we fall into 4 different type of boxes when we justify ourselves. And we oftentimes, as we betray ourselves over time, we develop some characteristic styles of self-justification. So the better than box has this sort of justification. The view of myself would be superior, important, maybe virtuous and right. And my view of others would then be inferior, incapable, irrelevant, false, or wrong. I will admit, in this particular situation, so we'll go back to this coaching situation, that there was a small period of time in which I had that I'm the mother and you are the son type of better than feeling. But I didn't have the feelings of being disdainful or indifferent. I certainly had the feeling of being impatient for a period of time. If we look at the I deserve box, the view of ourselves as meritorious, maybe mistreated or being a victim, unappreciated, and our view of others is that they are mistaken, they're mistreating us, or they're ungrateful. And a lot of the feelings that we have are entitled, deprived, or resentful. If we take a look at the need to be seen box, our view of ourselves is need to be well thought of. And our view of others is often judgmental, threatening, and we look at them as our audience. Feelings can be anxious, afraid, needy, stressed, or overwhelmed. And interestingly, we can have characteristics of each of these boxes in a given situation. The worse than box. View of myself as not as good, maybe broken. View of others as being privileged, advantaged, blessed. And our feelings can be helpless and jealous, maybe bitter, depressed. So I discovered in myself in this setting that I had a lot of them, but I think one that came up for me as a mother was the unappreciated, the I deserve box. And my view was that my son was ungrateful for 29, 30 years of being raised. And I have to say, I felt resentful. And when I went through this, I thought, oh my, this is how my reaction is, and this is how it's coming across. What kinds of questions come up with these boxes? And/or would you like me to go through them one more time so that you can maybe take a screenshot, because we're going to do a little work on this. Would that be helpful? Okay, so here's the better than box. So if you want to take a screenshot of that. Okay. Here is the I deserve box. Here is a shot of the need to be seen as box. And here is the worse than box. Now I'd like you to look at those as some typical human behavioral patterns. It doesn't mean you need to be fit into that. And as I've said, oftentimes you will find yourself doing several different things. But what we are doing at the heart of this is we are seeing other people as objects, as opposed to seeing them as human beings with needs that are just as justified as my own. So here's what I'd like you to do. Use one of the examples that you brought forth earlier in your own life, and let's complete the following chart. So do that for a few minutes, and then we'll have us break into a couple of breakout rooms. All right, Islam, would you be so kind as to divide people up into breakout rooms, and let's just ask the questions of what did you learn about yourself in that process? And where do you want to go from here?
Sure.
Are, does it show for you, the breakout room, Islam?
I think you're going to
Okay.
have
Okay, sure. All right. So you want groups of two?
That's great.
Okay.
That's fine.
Let's go ahead and do it.
And we'll just do that for about 10 minutes.
Okay. Everybody is gone. I think that's including us. Noha, can you hear me? السلام عليكم عبد الرحمن, can you hear me? عبد الرحمن سامعني؟ عبد الرحمن اعمل جوين اوديو, كمان نهى جوين اوديو لانه مو مبين عندكم المايك. نهى, can you hear me? عبد الرحمن, can you hear me? سامعني؟ بس اعمل unmute لأنه بين عندي المايك. اعمل unmute. أيوة.
اي مرحبا، اهلا وسهلا.
أهلا وسهلا, كيف الحال؟
الله يسعدكم، الحمد لله بخير. سركم الحال؟ كيف
أهلا
حالكم
وسهلا.
كوتش؟
الحمد لله تمام
الله
تمام.
يحييك.
أهلا وسهلا فيك.
الله
حضرتك دخلت هلا ولا من الأول؟
لا، توي دخلت الآن.
إحنا تقريبا باقي ربع ساعة والجميع في مجموعات. يعني
أي.
كان في سؤال على الموضوع اللي حكت فيه الكوتش كارول, وسألت سؤال ودخلنا في مجموعات عشان يعني نجاوب السؤال. بس ممكن نستغل هاي الفرصة يعني نتعرف عليك أكثر. حضرتك كوتش أو يعني كوتش ولا بدك تصير كوتش ولا شو؟
ايوه، انا حصلت على الاعتماد قبل 3 أسابيع ACC.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله, مبارك.
اي بارك فيكم. وانضميت للجروب تقريبا من شهرين تقريبا يعني.
نعم نعم تمام. من الممبرز يعني للممبرز
الصراحة
السعودي تشابتر.
ايوه من المنبرز.
تمام تمام. كيف الأمور ماشية يعني؟ إن شاء الله فيها فائدة والويبينارز والأكتيفيتيز مناسبة.
صراحة يعني أنا أعتبر نفسي لسه يعني في أول خطوة يعني، أو في أول المشوار يعني. حاسس إنه أول كنت أنا حاسس مرة الحالي أو وحيد يعني، ما في أحد حواليني مهتم بالكوتشنج ولا في أحد يعني
نعم.
عنده اعتماد وكذا. بعد ما انضميت للجروب حسيت إنه حواليني في ناس يعني على الأقل يعني في بيئة قدرت أنضم إليهم، وإن شاء الله يعني أكون يعني عضو أستفيد من هذه البيئة.
ان شاء الله ان شاء الله.
ك يعني كاكتيفيتي حاليا شخصي لسه يعني ما عندي شيء يعني، ان شاء الله انا حستفيد منكم كثير يعني.
ان شاء الله. يعني احنا سعيدين بانضمامك معنا اكيد. صار وقت ارجع الجميع للمين روم، فان شاء الله بالوقت المتبقي يكون في يعني تقدر تكون موجود معنا. اهلا وسهلا فيك.
الله يعطيكم العافيه ان شاء الله. يا فيكم اجل. اذا كذا انا معلش استاذن، يجيكم ان شاء الله في الويبينار الثاني حاحضر باذن الله في اول اللقاء عشان تكون الفائده متكامله باذن الله.
ان شاء الله. احنا بنبدا
الله يعطيكم العافيه. شكرا
لك. اهلا وسهلا. اهلا.
اوكي جميل جدا، رائع ان شاء الله.
اهلا وسهلا. اهلا وسهلا.
شكرا الف شكرا لكم. الله يسعدك. يا مرحبا.
اهلا هلا.
That was fun.
He just joined. I think maybe he got the time wrong or something.
Oh, that's okay. I've done that so many times.
None of the groups I joined, people responded.
Yeah, I joined one group. There was the person was silent, and then they went to another group where poor thing was all alone. Same problem.
Okay. Yeah. So how was it?
Maha and I had a lovely time.
Very much enjoyed that.
Well, Maha, why don't you share what you're willing to share about the experience of coaching through that pattern a little bit?
So it's nice to be able to look at both extremes of a certain situation and then recenter with what's my calm and what's my truth in this situation. And that kind of brings you back to what really is important and what it is that you do want to focus on. Yeah. Any other responses from groups?
I think it helps you stop playing as a victim and you start seeing things from different perspectives. Yeah, that's what I thought. It was very interesting actually using this model.
Yeah. And it is, Agnar, that you brought that up. It is the model in terms of remember we had the A, B, and C, the ABCs of our emotions. Mm-hmm. We can use these boxes in the B portion. What are we doing here? What thought processes are we have? Where are our beliefs coming from? Mm-hmm. That we have them. And oftentimes we just, again, they're running from head to heart inside, and we are not shining light on them until we have a marvelous coach that comes and asks us questions. Where did that come from?
Yes, absolutely. And also sometimes I always ask, what did I do to trigger this reaction or behavior? Even if it's not wrong. I mean, I'm not saying I'm blaming you, but there must be a certain action or certain word that has been said and or whatever it is that have triggered that certain behavior in that other person. And that's where you work from. If you can just pinpoint that starting point, and then you can start looking, where did it come from and why did it trigger this behavior in the other person, and so forth.
Then that's excellent, Agnar. And when I think of my particular situation that I brought up, one of the things that was a trigger for me that I didn't see for quite some time was the fact that my brother and sister-in-law did exactly the same thing to my own parents. Mm-hmm. And I saw how it fractured the family for quite a period of time, including through the raising of all of the different children. There was just that fracture there. And, oftentimes we go through life thinking that we're going to correct all the things that we thought were wrong, whether they be in relationships, whether they be in family. And those are our triggers, the things that we thought we were going to correct that we thought were wrong. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
often go through that process without realizing we're going to make a whole set of mistakes on our own.
Absolutely, yes. I
Yeah.
agree totally.
Any other thoughts in the process of that experience? Marah?
Sometimes I don't know if it's the right way of thinking about it, but sometimes it feels like if you try to see the situation or yourself in others people's eyes, you know, like from their perspective, from their point of view, what would that look like, and what may their thoughts or view be? I feel that sometimes can help me get some clarity.
I agree. And I think, and yet one of the things we want to be careful of with coaches, as coaches, is to not push someone else to see someone else's point of view. They really need to experience their own story, what's happening in their own story before they actually have the ability. I do remember a dear coach friend of mine saying to me, well, what do you think your son feels? And that was the last thing that I wanted to consider at the time. And I still find it now very difficult to imagine what he feels because I'm not him. But I have moved from that place of anger, resentment, to a place of understanding that this is where we are and that we can go forward from here. Yeah. And Islam, you're going to ask a question. I can see it.
Mhm.
Yeah, you and your relationship management skills, and you can tell when I'm asking questions. Thank you, Carol. Okay. So, yes, I was going to say, I think that's what makes this tool so powerful is that it helps you sort of gain control of that narrative. Like you are back in control of that situation and you own it. You know what your role is in terms of what you're feeling and in terms of where it fits. Like it actually, I think, helps you not just see things from a different perspective. It actually like eliminates that sense of anxiety because you kind of see where it's on paper. You see where you are and how your actions affect others.
Yeah. And I did this exercise for myself in this process. And I'm not here to tell you that it's all solved and give you a very Pollyanna answer to the situation. It's not solved. But I am in a better place to see my own reactions and to see what I need to be doing now. Withdrawing is not an option. And that's one of the things that is the messiness of coaching relationships. You may find that your clients will have still some residual of this and that they need to continue to work through. It is oftentimes, and I know most of you know this in terms of your own households or relationships with work or otherwise, we are often triggered by other people in other moments, in a given moment, in specific situations, and trying to understand and step back from that and understand why we're triggered. Same thing would be true for your clients and working with relationships. Everyone has those issues. So let me share for just a minute, just the last, my last thoughts here. Well, let's try, there we go. So our behavior, so our way of behaving and our way of being is coloring the world. And when we look at our heart at war, which is I see others as objects, they appear less real to me than I do to myself, and their cares matter less than my own. I resist their humanity. And I am being transparent, but sad to say that was a position that I found myself in with my own son, resisting that his cares didn't matter as much to me as my own. When our heart is at peace, we see others as they appear just as real to me as I do to myself. Their cares matter the same to me as my own, and I actively respond to their humanity. And this is something that I've had to remind myself of more times than not. The more sure that I am that I'm right, the more likely I am to be mistaken. So I have a thought that I'd like you to contemplate, and let's think this through. No one, whatever their actions, can deprive me of the ability to choose my own way of being or my own reactions. Difficult people are nevertheless people, and they always remain in my power to see them as people. What do you think about this? Is this an exhausting or an empowering thought? What do you think?
For me, it landed really empowering.
Okay.
I think it's a really empowering thought. And briefly, my experience with difficult people, although I think I am one sometimes, is that everybody has a story, and that empowers us to choose to be an influence for positive change in ourselves and in those difficult people.
I think it's both, a bit of both. It is empowering and it is also exhausting in some way to think
Yeah.
that.
And Mona said, for me, it's just fair. It's just, yeah, it is.
I think it just gives us that choices are within our control. You know, I mean, we control our choices that we do, and therefore we either choose to do that or not to talk to those people, or to take it. It's everything we do is our choice. I mean, in many ways. So, just gives me that I am in control of who I am and the choices I make.
Yeah, there's something very freeing about just making those choices, and there's something that is very entangling and messy of trying to control things that are beyond us in terms of our choices. So let me leave with open questions for anybody in terms of relationship coaching. What came to your mind? What concerns do you have about it? Just what questions might you have?
Our concerns are seems the soft border between degrees of counseling and what we see might be a positive direction for people to go, and coaching in terms of the locus of control is within the client.
It is, and I think in terms of counseling, Alan, it's wise to have certainly counselors in your back pocket for to recommend clients to. But remember that coaching is certainly delving into the past by just dipping your toe in it, noticing the patterns, not delving into how they got there and into those counseling realms, but noticing patterns, because we are our history. We can't just say, oh, coaching is moving forward and we're ignoring everything else. Everything else is all of who we are, and we are our patterns. What do we notice about them? And how does that noticing influence what we're doing now or what we're choosing to do now? Yeah. That's
Precisely.
great.
I think it's loyalty as well. I mean, sometimes like siding with one side more than the other, or feeling empathy with one person more than the other. And that's where I would worry about, just trying to be just and fair to both sides, and not, triggering things and emotions in me. And it's exactly what you said, our stories, because sometimes our stories and our experiences, they will just come in those instances. And I think this is something it's very challenging.
It is indeed. And so the rule of thumb is that we say a lot less and listen a lot more, which certainly is a rule of thumb with coaching, but it is so terribly important in relationship coaching.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as a rule of thumb, I highly recommend that you coach the individuals separately until such time as it works together.
Thank you so much, Carol. I think you've given us a lot to think about. I know that I'm going to probably not fall asleep right away tonight. I'm probably going to be reevaluating my own relationships. Watch out, Farah. Watch out, Alan. You know,
Whole team reorganization.
you, Carol. You know, so yeah,
Oh no.
right. I think you've given us a lot to think about. This was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. I'm sure everyone feels the same way. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts for Carol?
Just wanted to say thank you so much. I really enjoyed this whole talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Maha. Appreciate it.
We enjoyed your input today.
Yes, indeed. Very much so.
Yes, thank you so much, Carol. This will be posted on our YouTube website, as I'm sure Aslam was about to say, and we look forward to looking back through your slides and percolating over them.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And appreciated very much the interactive conversation. That was really so valuable for me as well. Appreciate it.
Well, we hope you come back one time. We hope
Love
you
to.
come back
Love
again.
to.
Yeah.
Would love to. Take you through a personality workshop that ends in this as well. That would be kind of fun.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
Thanks for having me very much. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to meet all of you.
Thank you.
All right.
Really enjoyed it as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and participating. And we look forward to hosting you again. Next month's webinar will be in Arabic, and our next English webinar will be in the month of December, last one for the year 2020. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thanks a lot.
Imanullah.
Right. Do you want to stick around, Islam, for a little longer?
I'm just removing the.
Do you want me to hop off?
No, I think that included you. We just wanted to thank you so much for an amazing time today.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I just had to remove those are the ones who weren't speaking.
Yeah.
That's okay.
You know, so thank you, Carol. Thank you. That was like, I think they enjoyed it. Farah, did you hear any comments from anyone?
I honestly think they did enjoy it. They interacted a lot, but also you've given us a lot to think about. So I think there was some pausing for processing. I had to process a lot. It was many things were such an eye opener, like a different way of thinking about it. I really liked when you asked me what happens if you're not attached to the outcome. And I thought I understood that, you know, when I'm coaching, that it's okay for me not, you know, for the client not to get to the result that they're after, like especially in the first session. Second, they may never get to what the outcome that they have mentioned at the beginning, but as long as we're shifting awareness, you know, then this is definitely something beneficial for them. However, you know, when I asked you about the, you know, the readiness of the client to take risks, and you answered, well, what happens if we're not attached to the outcome? Like, this is taking it to a whole new level for me. You know, like I didn't think about that. I always thought of, okay, would it be comfortable, uncomfortable? Would they be ready? Will I lead them to shut down and not participate? So that was really, really beneficial.
Oh, I'm glad about that part. Yet oftentimes we that's what brings us away from focusing on ourselves in our performance. You can ask anything. It's just the way you deliver that's important. So I use the example, and I'm sure Islam's heard me say this before. I had a woman client that said she has 7 dogs and was going to get 2 more dogs from a shelter just because it was COVID and it was a thing to do. And what comes to my mind as a reaction or a reflection is, are you out of your mind? And yet my question could simply be, that's an interesting thought. What brings you to that point? So I'm asking her exactly what I'm thinking, but the delivery is different. And that's where I want to say, okay, let's not be attached to that outcome. Let's have that reflective inquiry that says, okay, here I am, Farah, I'm shining a light on you. What are you seeing? And you may not see it. You may not, as you said, be ready or be in a place to see it. We may need to explore a little bit more, but if you're not attached to the outcome of your question, you're going to ask it. And I don't have any doubt in my mind that the way you would come across would be lovely and pleasant anyway. So that would,
This is amazing.
Trust your intuition. Ask those hard questions that say, are you out of your mind? But in a lovely way. We have a tendency to think that direct communication is offensive. And the only thing that's really offensive is our delivery. And if you'll notice, the new ICF competencies are all riddled with direct communication. It's throughout the entire new set of competencies, because they expect you to ask your client the question.
Speaking of communication, thank you for delivering the webinar in a very clear and sort of, like I noticed that your tone was, like your diction was very clear. You slowed it down because of the, like considering maybe the language barrier. Thank you for doing that. I think
absolutely
I appreciated that. I need to hop off because my family's trying to call me before they sleep.
Thank you so much.
You both later. Thank you so much for being here, Carol. I mean it. I'm just thrilled that you're here, like that you did this. I'm just
I am honored, completely honored that you asked me, and I would love to come back just to facilitate another conversation.
We'd love to have you back.
Thanks again. Everyone was so lovely, and I do appreciate it very much. I'm quite honored. Thank you.
I think next time they're going to be a lot more interactive as well. I think now they get it. But you see, they're shy. They're shy.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm glad you prepared me in advance. That was helpful.
Yeah. So. All right.
Have a wonderful evening, all of you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Farah.
Those relationships I'm talking about. All right. Bye, everyone.
Get to them.
Thank you.